there's a new strain of right-wing followers in this country that are worse than anything you have ever seen. Some of them say that we should have a dictatorship, and they're backed by about $8 billion. So this is as scary as it gets. Things keep getting worse and worse and worse. We're gonna bring on someone who wrote about them. James Pogue is contributing editor at Harper's, and he's author of the book Chosen Country, A Rebellion in the West. In this case, he wrote Inside the New Right, where Peter Thiel is placing his biggest bets. So James, welcome. First of all, we appreciate you coming on.
Thanks for having me, appreciate it.
No problem. So James, this is super scary stuff. Some of them believe that the Unabomber is right. They are talking about being royalists, that's in favor of a monarchy, and linked to white nationalists, which they're proud of, talking about the differences in race-based IQ. And then they say that everybody's unfair to them. So that's another question we'll get to in a second as to why that's unfair to point out what they actually say. But you actually went to one of their conferences. You had amazing access to them. So before we get to their most incendiary point of view, what is their central thesis of what is quote unquote the new right?
Well, so kind of the trick, right? I'm not sure there is a central thesis of the new right. It's an amalgam. You talked a lot about some of the kind of wild shaping influences. One of which is Ted Kaczynski, which used to be something that anarchists had latched onto on the American left. Now, maybe to start off with, we could talk about a figure named J.D. Vance, who is how I came to this. I was reporting on Vance. We're both from the same town. And Vance is sort of kind of in the middle of what you might think of as the online right, the very dissident kind of wild new world of people who are taking influences that have not historically been a part of American conservatism. And he's kind of blending it with what you might think is a rerun of kind of Pat Buchanan-esque conservatism. Other people might describe it as kind of like a kind of an attempt to create a Marine Le Pen style conservatism here in the States, to use the Republican Party as a vehicle for that. And so one of the tricks, though, and you alluded to this, is that people are looking for a way to re-centralize authority as they see it in the executive branch, so they can do a lot of things very quickly. And that is something that trends towards a pretty open embrace of authoritarianism in a new way on the right in America today.
Okay, so one of the things that you write is that at one point, one point shapes all of it. It is a project to overthrow the thrust of progress. And I think for a lot of people reading, even before you get to the Unabombers and all, and hey, yay, dictatorship sounds great. Even that statement, the central thesis of overthrowing the thrust of progress, that seems kind of crazy to most people. So what is there, but I want to be fair to these insane folks, okay? And you were very fair in your piece. And so what do they mean by that? What am I missing something? Is progress a bad thing? We should regress? I mean, can anyone really think that?
Well, actually, I think you might be surprised, or maybe the readers, listeners would be surprised, delving into some of the ideas in the piece, that this isn't actually just a historically right-wing critique, right? And the right has overtaken it. The right has started to articulate this idea that liberalism has been selling a kind of lie, that like our technology is not improving our lives the way that we are told that it's improving our lives. Capitalism is not improving our lives the way that we are told. This is kind of constant march of inevitable progress that is always making the world constantly better. This is a critique that has become very, very common on the American right today. And it's been articulated, especially among young people, much more than you would have heard it a long time ago. That said, I mean, it's not an insane critique. I was friends with the anarchist philosopher David Graeber, and he just wrote a huge book that just came out that is precisely about this, critiquing ideas of progress from the left. So I would tend to argue, in the spirit of fairness, that this is actually a conversation that's probably worth having. Is tech making our lives constantly better? Is capitalism constantly making our lives better?
Yeah.
Is this only path and mode of organizing a society?
Yeah, well, so there's a couple.
Sorry to cut you off.
No, sorry, James. There's a couple of issues here, right? So first of all, I understand the intellectual point being made. In a way, it reminds me of the book *Sapiens* when the author makes a point against the agricultural revolution, that it didn't necessarily make the life of Homo sapiens better, and that in the short term it might have made it worse. And so, and a similar critique could be made of industrial revolution, et cetera. But first of all, let's just be clear. On the left, there's like 3 dudes who believe that, and they have no power, none, zero, negative power. On the right, this is bankrolled by Peter Thiel, who has $8 billion. So it is creating an ecosystem of people who say progress sucks. And most people are not gonna look at that and go, hey, I wonder if this is an interesting critique of the agriculture industrial information revolution and how we could improve it. They're gonna look at it and go, oh yeah, that's right, let's go back. And this reminds me of Duginism from Russia that Putin believes in and Steve Bannon believes in, and apparently Tucker Carlson is interested in, where he says, no, we should literally go back to the Middle Ages. Not literally, because you don't have a time machine, but that he thought it was, that was better. So it's not, I don't want anybody thinking left wing, right wing is the same here. These guys can actually get into power. JD Vance just won the primary for the Senate race in Ohio. So before I get back to the substance, let's talk about Peter Thiel and how, like, to what degree is he bankrolling this? How much is he putting into politics and how much is he putting into media?
So in politics, it's a lot easier to trace, obviously, because is a lot more, and there's rules about that. And so as regards both JD Vance, who he gave more than $10 million to, and Blake Masters, there's a kind of conversation. Are these guys Peter Thiel's minions, his acolytes, all this sort of thing? I try to stay away from that. But the fact is that they would not be potentially entering the United States Senate, as JD and possibly even Blake could do, without a billionaire bankrolling. That's simply true. They're both former employees of Thiel's. Thiel helped to make them who they are. As far as the media and the kind of cultural ecosystem, Thiel has famously funded a kind of, like, people call it like post-woke, post-left film festival in New York. You wouldn't really think a tech billionaire would want to get involved in. He helped to fund something I went to called NatCon, which is a sort of conservative political conference, gathering space, place to exchange intellectual ideas. I would tend to argue that the meme that you may see on the internet of Thiel Box is greatly overinflated. He's not funding like a meme army. He may do that someday. But as it is, it's a very comforting narrative to have all of this just coming out of Peter Thiel's pocket. And the truth is that's not really what happened. Thiel is associating himself with a previous ecosystem that is growing up pretty organically.
But James, I'm not sure that the facts support what you're saying. So, and let me be clear. First of all, when you talk about the left also does this, again, not only is it 3 dudes, they're all bankrupt. There's no one on the left that's funding anything like this, right? So, but Peter Thiel, while by the way, they demagogue about how Soros is funding everything, he would never, ever fund anything like this. And not because he's necessarily a good guy, but because this is a destruction of the system that made him very wealthy. But Thiel is funding it. I mean, so you talked in your article about all those podcasters that he gives direct money to. In reality, you got the mythology of Soros, but he doesn't fund any podcasters. He doesn't fund any media. He would never fund progressives. He's not a progressive. He's a corporate Democrat. So there's a giant imbalance here. So let me get the facts straight, because you're the one who wrote the story. So I'm explaining the fact that none of that exists on the left, okay? There is no such ecosystem. So then you tell me how much of an ecosystem Thiel has created in right-wing media. So I know he's not funding Fox News, that's a much larger operation, for example, right? But by the way, he did fund Facebook, that's another issue. He was a board member there and invested in it. But how many podcasters is he funding? Do we have any idea how much money he's putting into that right-wing media ecosystem?
The truth is, I actually do not have a dollar figure to give you. I wish I did. So I reported in the piece, probably a lot of people that overlapping listenership here. I reported in the piece that they had met with Anna Kay from Red Scare. As far as I know, they didn't get any money. That doesn't mean that they won't get money someday. It doesn't mean that I know that whole story. That's just something that Blake Masters told me. And I think it's interesting going to how deep Thiel's involvement in this is that that's something they volunteered. That's something I didn't have to dig for. They're not hiding a great deal as far as I know. And again, obviously, later, my sense is that this is a growing set of experiments. The stuff with the film festivals, things like this. This is a kind of experiment to throw things at a wall and see what works. And I absolutely agree with you. First of all, the left does not have these people. Certainly not the real left view. Probably I would tend to. The left does not have people like this. And also, this is a kind of model that I don't think we've really seen in the United States, at least in recent years. This isn't, in a long sense, what you are trying to do, actually, I think, is create an alternative to George Soros, and not just an alternative to him, but an alternative to the ecosystem that he's operating in, the world of NGOs, the world of think tankers, the world of what you might call like academic experts who staff the opinion pages and things like that. They're trying to bust that open and create an entirely new set of institutions. Something, frankly, I mean, you mentioned Dugan. Hungary is another one where you've sort of literally seized the media institutions and brought them into an entirely new way of messaging. That I would tend to think is the goal and where this is all headed. And you do hear that a lot, I mean, in conversations from these people.
And James, also, let's be clear, Peter Thiel advised Elon Musk. I mean, if he was experimenting with small podcasters, et cetera, buying Twitter at $44 billion is a completely different level. And then Elon Musk then declared that he's a Republican and going to support the right wing. I don't know that he's involved with the new right or any of that, but he is definitely friends with Peter Thiel. Peter Thiel definitely did advise him to buy Twitter. So, and again, Bezos is not in this group at all, but these oligarchs are buying a lot of media. And Bezos bought the Washington Post, obviously. So this is not a fringe theory that backed up by a couple of professors on each side. One side has the world's richest men on their side.
Oh yeah, I mean, and the other person to think about in this ecosystem is Mark Andreessen, who you can just follow on Twitter. I'm not saying he's directly involved in a lot of politics, but you can tell that he's messaging codes of the new right pretty openly. And with regard to Musk, I think what you're looking at is a real, let's put it this way. The new right views the institutions of power in this country differently than the left. They view the institutions of power as being universities, media centers. I mean, we can go down that list, but they do not view it as a class issue, right? They view power operating in the United States as being lodged in a liberal cultural elite, which is a great way of absolving rich guys from responsibility for custodianship of this society in an honest and decent way. And that's where it starts to personally, I mean, I come from the left, that's where it starts to personally start to get very alarming to me. So you saw Andreessen tweeting recently that actually a lot of rich people in the United States are not elite because they're not operating like I am in a cultural sphere where I get to write for Vanity Fair or something, which I think that's an important conversation to be having in certain ways. But when you get it to the point where it's absolving billionaires of even being the literal term elite, you have to start wondering, like, who is this ideology serving, and how did this intellectual sphere get elevated so quickly? And it seems to be that there's an answer. It's convenient for them, right? And that's something that really scares me.
Yeah, so look, now let's get to their goals, because I think their goals are both scary and childish at the same time. So there's references to Leni Riefenstahl, Nazi propagandist, there's the Unabomber, there's the talk of royalists and monarchies. So, well, how real is that? Like, is that like, oh, one guy kind of randomly wrote that and the mainstream media is being unfair and pinning that on the whole movement, et cetera? or no, they're interested in setting up a monarchy instead of a democracy?
Well, the monarchy, you'll often hear this, right? What is the monarchy supposed to look like, right? And a lot of what you're getting from people is actually that they want it to look like Roosevelt. They want it to look like what, when Roosevelt kind of created the agency-run federal government, such as they see it back in the in peak New Deal era, he lodged a lot of power in the presidency and with himself, and they want to recreate that. The trick though is that you'll hear a lot of jokes. You'll hear a lot of jokes about like restoring the Stuart monarchy, the deposed kings of England in the 17th century. You'll hear a lot of stuff like that. It's actually like a lot more prosaic, and it's a lot more kind of, you can hear in these conversations like very detailed plans about how a coup would work. And you will hear guys talking about like US Marshals at the Fed. You will hear people talking in very open terms about extra constitutional action. You will hear people talking about kind of winding up agencies and even like NGOs like the Southern Poverty Law Center. A lot of people in this sphere tend to view the SPLC as something like a kind of intelligence gathering arm of the American state. And they talk very openly like, we're going to retire those people. And it's all supposed to be very peaceful. But this is a shaping, this is not coming from one person. This is a whole ecosystem of people really rethinking about how power is going to work here. And it's all headed one way. It's all headed towards more power for the executive, which I guess is another way of saying authoritarianism.
Yeah, that's definitely what it is. I mean, look, if they said, I think the president should do a couple more executive orders, we're not having this conversation. I would counter with so what, right? That's not interesting. No, they don't seem to be saying that. When you say extra constitutional actions, no, that's a direct attack on our democracy. Saying we don't believe in the Constitution. We're gonna go, the minute you go outside the Constitution, you're going outside of the laws of this country. Meaning, that's it, it's over, we're screwed. Like, you can't go a little outside of it on purpose and be like, yeah, I mean, we're gonna give the executive power that he doesn't have in the Constitution, and well, then how would you enforce it? The courts would say no. Well, we enforce it with a gun. That's how you enforce it. That's the only way to enforce it if you're going outside the laws and outside the Constitution. And it's not like they're shy about saying, yeah, we need a strong executive like a monarch. Yeah, I mean, unless I'm massively, and you are massively understanding what they're saying, they seem to be clearly headed in an authoritarian direction. And the other thing is, James, is as you answer that, when authoritarian leaders take over, they don't just wake up one morning and go, hey, I'd like to be dictator, and then boom, the next day they're a dictator. No, you need a movement like this that gets the ground ready and does BS arguments for like, well, I mean, I think the royalists in the 17th century had it right. Oh, I'm a philosopher, and I think, FDR my ass. None of these guys are interested in FDR. What, do they want the government to be bigger and stronger like FDR made it? No, of course not, unless it is to oppress others. They're not looking, are they looking to raise wages? Are they looking to get everybody health care? No, this is about power for one person. Tell me where I'm going wrong.
Well, I would tend to argue, they would tend to argue. And I think that there's a level on which this should be taken in good faith. That doesn't mean I agree with them. They do want to raise wages. They do, and they do want healthcare for all. There's a catchphrase that a lot of people in this sphere use, that it's Medicare for all, abortions for none. And that kind of is a very succinct way of showing kind of where they're coming from, which is like, economically populist, adopting a lot of things that used to be, sort of platforms and parts of a leftist program, but applying them as a way of sort of creating a family values, renationalized sort of patriotic common good state. You'll often hear, right? Common good being a catchphrase here that could stand in for a lot of things that not necessarily everybody would regard as common good. But actually, I would tend to argue that they do actually want a very strong state. You have to have a very strong, if you want to ban porn, as a lot of people do in this sphere, you've got to have a very strong state. If you want, as a lot of people in this sphere do, you want to create an American economy where one salary can provide for an entire family, you're going to have a very strong executive, a very strong Congress as well, and pass some very sweeping, very intrusive, frankly, governmental changes in this country, things that we have not seen for many years. And that is Blake Masters running for Senate in Arizona. That is his signature policy proposal. The trick is, what are the steps between now and getting there? And in a structure such as the Republican Party, dominated by a very small set of donors, dominated by organizations like the Club for Growth, are all those sort of like, let's say, populist economic programs going to be the first thing that gets shed, just as they were when, Trump made some populist economic noises and then ended up passing a tax cut and basically doing nothing else. It's very easy to look at the imperatives within the structure of the Republican Party and think none of this populist economic stuff is ever going to happen. And that's something I've talked to them a lot about. And yeah,
I'm curious about that. So I want.
But they are very skeptical. Yeah.
No. Look, at best they're idiots. That's never going to happen with a very strong state of a dictator, right? So yeah, I know they want a really strong state because they want authoritarianism. They want one dictator. Guess who's going to raise their hand, by the way? Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, our oligarchs. And in that state, hey, I got news for them. These idiot new right guys are going to have zero power. You think they're going to listen to you? A dictator, by definition, doesn't listen to you or anyone else. And by the way, they usually eliminate the people next to them first. But the reason why I'm animated by how obviously stupid or they are, or how much they're lying, is Medicare for all. They can't, come on, James, they can't be that dumb. So here, their boy, JD Vance just won. If JD Vance becomes a senator, here's a percentage chance that he will argue for Medicare for all or vote for it. 0, none. They don't know that? You think Peter Thiel wants Medicare for all? No, he wants more money and he wants more power. How can they be that dumb?
Right. I mean, I agree with that. I agree with that 100%. Frankly, this is actually a conversation I have had directly with JD Vance off the record. And there's some interesting thoughts that come out of that. He's a guy and a very tortured guy in a lot of ways. And he understands the contradictions of the path that he is going down, which is a very interesting thing in American politician. And that's tough to fit into a TV soundbite. With all that said, I mean, he talked to me at like a decent amount of length about the influence of the donors. The Club for Growth came out really strong against him. But you do see, like, okay, fine, the Club for Growth comes out against you. What happens? You're right. I've never heard him talking about healthcare. I don't think we ever will. And what he will talk about, and this is a real thing. I mean, he will talk about trying to build a coalition of reactionaries and people who are otherwise outside of politics. A kind of mirror image of what we saw with the Bernie campaign, to be frank. And sweep to power. He will say, I do not want to get into power with 52% of the vote. I want an overwhelming mandate to really reshape this country. And this is not stuff that he's talking about for his first Senate campaign. He is talking about 10 years, 15 years down the line when he's going towards bigger game. If people are not aware that this is where this is all headed, these people are talking about getting to the presidency, then they're not really aware of what's going on.
Yeah, no, it's a terrible, ridiculous movement that is completely against the core tenets of not just America, but Western civilization. And it's so ironic because they think Western civilization is, yay, white people. No, it's a set of ideas that are antithetical to this. It's Western civilization is about diffusing power. Magna Carta, US Constitution, the French Revolution, etc. It diffuses power, civil rights movement. It doesn't gather power up in one dictator or one king. That is what progress was, diffusing that power to all of us as much as possible. And these guys they're saying they want to go backwards. They want to go backwards but the last thing, James, is really important. I think that they are desperate, and they're looking for desperate measures because they feel like, I'll put it in my words, not their words, that corporate rule is crushing them. And that a huge part of that is corporate media that does one lie after another, brazen, outrageous lies that has basically driven them mad, right? And on that, I don't think they're wrong. I think that they correctly assessed the problem in the first step and then took 28 steps in the wrong direction afterwards. Or, the way we beat corporate media and corporate rules with a dictator and the Unabomber, right? But am I right in assessing that the core of the problem began with them saying, well, I don't know what's true, but I know what I'm seeing on mainstream media ain't right?
Yes, I 100% agree with that. And I think the tragedy of it is that to some degree, the corporate media has responded to this movement along with other things. And I say this is, I wrote this for a Condé Nast publication. In the corporate media, but if you have people who you sort of are not buying your narrative, your response is to try to harden that narrative in increasingly frantic ways and to misportray people in certain ways, that's not going to work out well. And I've said this a lot in interviews since this piece came out. The best way to beat these people, if you want to prevent a dictator, is to actually have a functioning media ecosystem where people can discuss rational things rationally. And we don't have, there's a lot of different reasons why we don't have that right now. But if we don't get back to it, yeah, I think actually there is going to be a dictator because there's just, America's not going to function. And the best way to stop them is to be better at this stuff than they are.
Corporate rule is destroying this country. It's set up infinite greed, and we're going to have a choice. We're either going to go towards going backwards towards a dictatorship and trashing our Constitution, or we're going to go populist left and actually get power to the people. And they are going to actually push for things that help everyone and not just one guy at the top. We're going to have that choice. But by the way, that is why corporate media hates both the right wing and progressives. And at least they hear the right wing out. At least they'll have them on television. At least JD Vance can say anything he wants. Trump can insult mainstream media any way he wants, and they'll still get a microphone jammed right in front of their face to make their argument to the whole country. Corporate media hates progressives 10 times worse and will never allow us to make our case in corporate media. So the more they bottle up progressives, the more they are aiding and abetting the new right in this incredibly destructive path. But you can't talk sense into corporate media because they're paid to not state the facts, to not understand the phenomenon that's going on in this country. And it's the original cancer, it really is. But look, James's piece is amazing. It's got all the information in there. You should read it yourself. It's called Inside the New Right, where Peter Thiel is placing his biggest bets. It's in Vanity Fair. Check it out. James, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it. Appreciate it.